Imagine being buried alive. Yes, that's right, buried alive. You awake inside a tight, dark, confined space. You begin to hallucinate, your greatest fear. What do you do next? Tons of dirt on top of the only way out. Join us as we share the true story of Marjorie McCall, who survived being buried alive. Stay to the end to learn what's inscribed on her headstone. Welcome to the Spine Thrills channel, where your nightmares come true. In the heart of Lurgan, a small town in County Armagh, Ireland, nestled amid rolling green hills and quaint stone cottages, there lies a cemetery with a tale that has echoed throughout the centuries, a tale of death, burial, and a most miraculous resurrection. This is the true story of Marjorie McCall, the lady with the ring, whose remarkable return from the grave would become the stuff of legend since the 18th century. The McCall family, residents of Lurgan, were well known in their close-knit community. Mr. John McCall, a respectable and hard-working man, provided for his family as a weaver, and his wife, Marjorie McCall, was known for her gentle demeanor and kindness to her neighbors. The McCalls were content in their modest home, living a simple life amidst the green fields and rolling hills of County Armagh. In the spring of 1705, a devastating fever swept through Lurgan, bringing illness and death to many of the town's inhabitants. Tragically, Marjorie McCall fell victim to this merciless disease. Her fever was relentless, and her condition deteriorated rapidly. Despite the best efforts of the local doctor, her life slipped away on a cold and stormy night. As Marjorie drew her final breath, her family wept, and the town mourned the loss of a beloved member of their community. Preparations for her burial began immediately, as was the custom in those days. In the early hours of the morning, following Marjorie's death, the rain poured down relentlessly. The McCall family, in their grief-stricken state, hastily prepared her for burial, for fear of the fever spreading. Marjorie was dressed in her finest clothes, including her treasured wedding ring, a symbol of her love and commitment to her husband, John. The funeral procession made its way to Shankill Cemetery, guided by flickering lanterns that barely cut through the darkness. The torrential rain turned the dirt road into a muddy quagmire, making the journey to the cemetery a treacherous one. With heavy hearts, the McCall family and their neighbors proceeded with the burial. As Marjorie's coffin was lowered into the ground, the mourners clung to their lanterns, their faces streaked with a combination of tears and rain. The sound of shovels scraping against wet earth mingled with the patter of raindrops, a melancholic symphony of sorrow and loss. We can only imagine the nightmare Marjorie endured beneath the ground. In the suffocating darkness of her makeshift tomb, Marjorie's return to consciousness was a bewildering and terrifying experience. As her senses gradually stirred, she became aware of the heavy weight pressing down upon her chest, a weight that seemed to crush the very breath from her lungs. Panic surged through her veins like an electric shock. The air inside the coffin felt dense and stifling, as though it had been replaced by an impenetrable fog. Every inhalation was a desperate struggle for oxygen, and each exhalation brought a sharp reminder of her dire predicament. Marjorie's chest tightened, and the walls of the coffin seemed to close in around her. In her disoriented state, her first instinct was to move, to escape the confines of the wooden prison that held her captive. But as she attempted to stretch her limbs, she realized with horror that there was barely enough space to do so. She was entombed in a cramped, airless chamber, and the walls of the coffin pressed against her like a vice. Marjorie's body, weakened by the fever that had nearly claimed her life, felt leaden and unresponsive. Her movements were slow and labored, and her muscles protested with each effort. She could feel the cold, damp fabric of her burial clothes clinging to her skin, a chilling reminder of the rain-soaked earth that surrounded her. As her eyes adjusted to the profound darkness, Marjorie became aware of oppressive silence that enveloped her. Gone were the sounds of mourners, raindrops, and shovels scraping against the earth. She was alone in a world of shadow and silence, a world that defied all reason and logic. Fear clawed at her heart, and her mind whirled with a cacophony of thoughts and questions. Had she been buried alive? Was this a nightmare from which she could not wake? The answers eluded her, and a profound sense of isolation settled over her like a shroud. With trembling fingers, Marjorie reached out into the darkness, seeking anything that might offer a glimmer of hope or a clue to her whereabouts. Her questing hands encountered the smooth surface of the coffin's lid, and the realization struck her like a thunderbolt. She was indeed buried alive. Tears welled up in Marjorie's eyes, mingling with the perspiration that coated her pallid skin. She was trapped in a macabre prison of her own making, the weight of the earth above her a constant reminder of her perilous situation. In the pitch-black confines of the coffin, her thoughts spiraled into a vortex of despair. Time became an elusive concept, its passage marked only by the relentless drumbeat of her own heartbeat. Marjorie's mind, once clouded by fever and delirium, now sharpened with a singular focus, a desperate determination to escape this living nightmare. Summoning every ounce of her remaining strength, Marjorie began to push against the lid of the coffin. Her movements were feeble, and her progress agonizingly slow, but she refused to yield to the crushing weight of hopelessness. With each exertion, she inched closer to the possibility of salvation. It was a battle against the very forces of nature, a fight for life waged in the most dire of circumstances. The darkness that had enveloped her was now illuminated by the flickering flame of her indomitable will. Marjorie McCall, buried alive, was determined to claw her way back to the world of the living, to embrace the sunlight, and to defy the shadow of death that had loomed over her. Except that she was gasping for air. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Suddenly, the flickering image of her husband laying down beside her. He grasped her hand and told her, "Don't be afraid of the spiders." At that moment, a writhing, seething horde of eight-legged terrors emerged from the darkness. Their spider fangs, gleaming with venom, were a grotesque promise of agony and despair. The air became heavy with the acrid scent of the arachnid menace, a sickly sweet odor that clung to her senses and filled her with a nauseating dread. In their ceaseless, predatory advance, the spiders created a symphony of unsettling sounds, a soft, skittering discord of rustles and clicks that reverberated through the shadows. Marjorie started hyperventilating, and soon after, fell unconscious. Unbeknownst to the mourners, a group of grave robbers had been lurking in the shadows, watching the proceedings with malevolent intent. They had caught wind of the valuable jewelry that adorned the deceased woman. As the rain poured and the mourners dispersed, the grave robbers descended upon Marjorie's freshly dug grave. Their shovels and picks tore into the earth with a feverish urgency. Their hearts raced with anticipation of the riches they believed they would uncover. Deeper and deeper, they dug until at last they reached the coffin. With trembling hands, they forced it open, their breaths held in anticipation of the gleaming prize, the wedding ring. But as they began to cut the ring off Marjorie's swollen finger, their lanterns illuminated her face. And in that horrifying moment, Marjorie McCall, who had been thought dead and buried, opened her eyes wide and sat bolt upright. It was a sight that sent shockwaves of terror through the grave robbers' souls. Marjorie's eyes, once lifeless, now blazed with a fiery intensity that pierced through the darkness. She drew a deep, shuddering breath and let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed throughout the cemetery. The grave robbers, paralyzed by fear, stumbled backward, dropping their lanterns and tools. They fled from the grave, their screams of terror joining Marjorie's in a dissonant chorus of horror. Marjorie, still weak from her illness and disoriented from the ordeal, clawed her way out of the coffin and emerged from the grave. The rain had drenched her, her clothes clung to her frail frame, and her skin was as pale as the moonlight that illuminated the scene. Yet, she was undeniably alive. Marjorie's miraculous return to the land of the living was nothing short of astounding. Disheveled and drenched, she made her way back to her family's home in Lurgan, where her arrival caused a commotion that rippled through the entire town. In an ironic twist, her husband John sadly dropped dead at the shocking sight of her and was buried in the plot she'd recently vacated. The tale of Marjorie McCall's resurrection quickly spread throughout Ireland and beyond. It became a story of hope, of the indomitable human spirit, and of the mysteries that lie beyond the realm of the living. Marjorie, the lady with the ring, had defied death itself and returned from the grave. She lived for many more years after her miraculous return, a living testament to the extraordinary and inexplicable. When she died again, her body was returned to Shankill graveyard and marked with the tombstone that bears the inscription, "Lived once, buried twice." Her story, forever etched into the annals of Irish folklore, serves as a reminder that even in the face of death, life's most astonishing surprises may await us in the darkness of the unknown. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you have a true story that is scary, creepy, or horrifying, which is well written, and you would like me to share, send the story to spinethrills@gmail.com.